The dust of a dozen broken nations clung to her boots, a fine, pale powder that seemed to mock the very idea of clean. Forward. Operating base. Nightingale rose from the ochre plains like a fever dream of concertina wire and HESCO barriers. Its perimeter a jagged scar on the landscape. The air tasted of diesel fumes and baked earth. At the main entry control point, a young airman, his name tape reading Patel, leaned against the sandbags of his guard post, the picture of board authority. He watched her approach on foot from the direction of the landing strip, a lone figure shimmering in the heat haze. She carried a single, nondescript duffel bag and wore practical cargo pants and a faded khaki shirt with no insignia. Her face was a study in anonymity, framed by dark hair pulled back in a severe, functional knot. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of long hours staring into suns much harsher than this one. Patel straightened up, but only just. He held his M4 rifle with a practiced laziness, the muzzle pointed safely at the ground. "Hold there, ma'am," he called out, his voice cracking with the last vestiges of adolescence. "State your name and purpose." She stopped 10 feet from the barrier. "Commander Eva Rostova, I'm here to see Colonel Thorne." Her voice was low, devoid of inflection, as if the heat had boiled away any unnecessary energy. Patel squinted, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. No uniform, no escort, just a woman who looked like she could be a contract linguist or a misplaced NGO worker. Commander was a naval rank. What was a Navy officer doing walking into an Air Force and Army-run FOB in the middle of nowhere, dressed like a backpacker? He chewed on the inside of his cheek. "Rostova," he repeated, dragging the name out as he consulted a battered clipboard. He flipped through the pages with deliberate slowness. "Don't see you on the inbound manifest." "It was a last-minute flight," she said, her patience a placid lake. "My orders were transmitted directly to the TOC." "Right," Patel said, the word dripping with disbelief. "Everyone's orders are last minute and top secret. Look, ma'am, I can't just let you walk on base. You know the procedure." He gestured vaguely toward a small, sun-bleached tent set off to the side. "You'll have to wait there. I'll call the sergeant of the guard when I get a chance. He'll sort you out." He turned away, a clear dismissal, and resumed his conversation with the other guard in the tower, their laughter carrying on the dry wind. Rostova said nothing. She didn't sigh, didn't tap her foot. She simply shifted her weight, found a sliver of shade cast by a concrete barrier, and waited. She watched the heat dance on the hoods of parked MRAPs. She watched a logistics convoy kick up a plume of dust on the horizon. She observed the patrol patterns of the guards on the wall, noting their fields of fire. The dead, space beneath the towers, the predictable rhythm of their vigilance. She waited for 17 minutes. Finally, a Humvee rumbled up from inside the base, and a beefy Air Force Master Sergeant with a face like a clenched fist climbed out. "Patel, what's the holdup?" he barked. "Civilian, Sarnt. Says she's a Commander Rostova here to see the Colonel, not on my manifest." The Master Sergeant, Vance, turned his gaze on Rostova. He was a career NCO, a man who had seen every type of officer come and go, the political climbers, the textbook tacticians, the genuine warriors. He saw something in the woman's stillness that gave him pause. It wasn't arrogance. It was an absolute economy of presence. She wasted no energy, no motion. "I'm Rostova," she said, her voice cutting through the sergeant's assessment. "My credentials should be on file with your S2. Vance grunted. "Let's see some ID." She produced a simple, black government identification card. It had her name and a photo, but no rank or affiliation. It was the kind of sterile ID that screamed classified. Vance looked at it, then at her, then back at the card, He handed it back. "All right, come with me," he said, his tone shifting from irritation to professional neutrality. "Patel, next time someone presents with credentials like that, you expedite the call. Don't leave them cooking in the sun." Patel flushed, stammering an apology as Rostova walked past him without a glance. The gate was a microcosm, she knew. A first tiny test of a system's efficiency and discipline. This one was sloppy. The Tactical Operations Center was a pressurized, air-conditioned bubble of quiet intensity, a stark contrast to the blazing world outside. Screens flickered with satellite imagery, drone feeds, and streams of encrypted data. The low hum of servers and the murmur of analysts formed the room's heartbeat. Colonel Marcus Thorne stood before a massive central display, a hand on his hip, projecting an aura of absolute command. He was a tall man, impeccably uniformed, his face set in the permanent scowl of someone who believed himself to be the smartest person in any room. When Master Sergeant Vance escorted Rostova in, Thorne turned, his eyes sweeping over her with visible disappointment. He had been expecting someone from SOTV, a liaison for the upcoming operation. He had pictured a square-jawed SEAL lieutenant commander, bristling with gear and quiet menace. He got her. "Colonel Thorne," Vance announced. "This is Commander Rostova." Thorne didn't extend a hand. "You're Rostova? I was told they were sending an operational planner." "I'm here to observe and advise on Operation Serpent's Maw," she replied, her voice unchanged by the room's chill or the colonel's frosty reception. "Observe and advise," Thorne repeated, a thin, patronizing smile touching his lips. He turned to a group of men standing nearby, their desired, multicam uniforms a shade darker, their gear more customized than the standard-issue soldiers in the TOC. They were SEALs. Team 3, call sign Reaper. "Gentlemen, this is Commander Rostova. She'll be our liaison from the Puzzle Palace." The team's leader, a lieutenant commander named Jensen with the call sign Raptor, gave Rostova a lazy once-over. His expression was a mixture of amusement and contempt. He was young, fit, with the easy confidence of a man who had never failed at anything physical in his life. He and his team, Diablo, Spectre, and Doc, exchanged subtle smirks. A woman, a Navy commander, who looked like she spent her days behind a desk, here to advise them. It was a joke. "Ma'am," Jensen said, the honorific laced with irony. Rostova met his gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't rise to the bait. She simply moved to the periphery of the briefing circle, her eyes scanning the maps and intel on the main screen. Thorne cleared his throat, enjoying the dynamic. "All right, let's get back to it. Reaper team, your objective is a downed RQ-170 Sentinel. It went down here," he said, pointing to a deep, winding canyon system on the topographical map. "The Serpent's Maw, high-value ISR platform. We have to recover the core data module and scuttle the wreckage before local hostiles get their hands on it. Intel suggests light militia presence, disorganized, technically unsophisticated. Standard smash and grab." Jensen nodded, his focus absolute now that the conversation had returned to his world. "Infill will be via Little Bird, 2 clicks east of the crash site. Move in, secure the package, plant the charges, and exfil before sunrise. Simple." "Intel says," Rostova said softly from the edge of the room. Every head turned toward her. The analysts blinked, surprised she had spoken. Thorne's jaw tightened. "Do you have something to add, Commander?" "Your thermal imagery is 12 hours old," she stated, her gaze fixed on the screen. "The signal's intelligence report notes intermittent, encrypted burst transmissions from that sector starting 6 hours ago. The pattern doesn't match local militia capabilities. They use unencrypted radios and cell phones, This is something else." A tense silence filled the talk. One of the junior analysts looked at his screen, then back at the colonel, a flicker of confirmation in his eyes. Jensen scoffed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we've been operating in this AO for 6 months. We know these insurgents. They buy fancy gear sometimes, but they don't know how to use it. It's probably just atmospheric interference. The transmission nodes form a geometric triangulation pattern," Rostova countered, her voice still quiet but cutting through the air like chilled steel. "It suggests a deliberate, networked sensor grid. They aren't just sitting there, they're listening. They know something is coming." Colonel Thorne's face hardened. This woman, this paper pusher, was questioning his intel and his lead operator in his TOS. "Your concerns are noted, Commander," he said, his voice dangerously low. "But Reaper Team is the best we have. They are more than capable of handling a few goat herders with stolen radios. We are on a tight schedule. The mission proceeds as planned." He turned his back on her, a final, emphatic dismissal. "Raptor, get your men ready. Wheels up in 30. Jensen gave Rostova one last smirk before turning to his team. "You heard the man. Let's go dance." They filed out, a tight unit of muscle and swagger, leaving Rostova standing alone in the cold, humming heart of the base. She watched them go, her expression unreadable. She then walked over to a vacant console, pulled up the raw SIGINT data, and began her own analysis, her fingers moving across the keyboard with a quiet, methodical certainty. The men in the room ignored her, writing her off as a bureaucratic nuisance. They had no idea they were in the presence of a ghost. The night air over the Serpent's Maw was thin and cold. The 2 MH-6 Little Birds flew nap of the earth, their rotors whispering just above the jagged ridgelines. Inside the lead helicopter, LCDR Jensen, Raptor, ran a final check on his gear. His team, Diablo on the M240, Spectre on comms and electronics, and Doc, the corpsman, were silent, focused, their faces painted in green and black camouflage, illuminated by the faint glow of the cockpit instruments. It was a routine mission, a milk run. The condescending advisor back at the talk was just another reminder of how out of touch headquarters was. 1 minute, the pilot's voice crackled in their headsets. The helicopters flared, settling into a dusty landing zone with barely a bump. The 4 SEALs dismounted, melting into the shadows of the rock formations. They moved with the fluid, predatory grace of apex hunters, covering ground quickly and silently. Spectre got a link, Jensen whispered into his throat mic. "Connecting to the drone feed now. I've got Nightingale Actual on comms." "Signal's weak down in this hole," Spectre replied. "No thermal signatures detected near the crash site. Looks clear." "Copy, let's move." They advanced down the narrow, winding wash that led into the canyon's heart. The walls of rock rose hundreds of feet on either side, blotting out the stars. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on loose gravel and the whisper of the wind. It felt too quiet. The natural nocturnal sounds of the desert, insects, animals were absent. "Something's not right," Diablo murmured, his hand tightening on the grip of his machine gun. "It's dead out here." "Stay sharp," Jensen ordered, though he felt it too, a prickling on the back of his neck. They rounded a sharp bend, and the crash site came into view. The sleek, black wing of the RQ-170 was a slash of alien geometry against the pale rock. It was broken, but largely intact. "Okay, Reaper Team, we're on site," Jensen reported. "Spectre, Diablo, set security. Doc, you're with me. We secure the module." As Jensen and Doc moved toward the cockpit section, Spectre knelt, deploying a small counter-surveillance device. He frowned. "Boss, I'm getting weird EM interference. Something's blanketing the area. can't get a solid lock on our comms." Suddenly, a single, high-velocity round cracked past Jensen's head, close enough for him to feel the air displace. It slammed into the rock behind him, showering him with stone chips. "Contact!" he yelled, diving for cover. The world exploded. The quiet canyon erupted into a perfectly coordinated storm of fire and violence. Muzzle flashes blinked from a dozen concealed positions high up on the canyon walls. A textbook, L-shaped ambush. Heavy machine gun fire, methodical and controlled, ripped into the ground around them, chewing up rock and dirt. It wasn't the wild spraying fire of militia. This was professional. This was a trap. "RPG!" Diablo screamed, and a second later, a rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the drone's fuselage, engulfing it in a ball of orange flame. The force of the blast threw Doc against the canyon wall. He slumped to the ground, his leg twisted at a sickening angle. "Doc's hit! Doc's hit!" Spectre yelled, laying down suppressive fire with his rifle. "Comms are gone. Something's jamming us completely." Jensen crawled to Doc, ignoring the round snapping over his head. The corpse man was conscious, his face pale with shock and pain. A large piece of shrapnel had torn through his thigh. Blood was already pooling in the dust. "Hang on, buddy," Jensen grunted, pulling out Doc's medical kit and trying to apply a tourniquet. "They knew we were coming," Diablo roared over the din of his machine gun. "They were waiting for us. This is a goddamn kill box." The enemy fire was relentless, precise. They weren't just shooting. They were hurting them, pinning them behind the scant cover of the burning wreckage, cutting off any possible retreat. Jensen could hear them now, the sound of boots on scree, as they began to maneuver down the slopes, tightening the noose. They were being dismantled, systematically taken apart by a superior force. Back in the talk at FOB Nightingale, the mood had shifted from calm routine to rising panic. "Reaper Team's comms just went dead," an analyst announced, his voice tight. "Their last transmission was contact. Drone feed is gone too. The link was severed." Colonel Thorne stood ramrod straight, his face a mask of controlled fury. "What do you mean, gone? Get them back online." "We can't, sir. The entire frequency spectrum in that sector is being actively jammed. It's a sophisticated, wide-band electronic warfare attack. We're blind." Thorne paced in front of the screens, which now showed only static-filled maps of the Serpent's Maw. "Scramble the QRF, get birds in the air now." "Sir, we can't send a quick reaction force into a blind kill zone with no communications," the QRF commander argued over the radio. "We'll lose them too. We have no idea what they're up against." Thorne's authority was crumbling. He was a garrison commander, a logistician, an expert in managing supply lines and force protection for a static base. He was not a battlefield tactician. He was barking orders, but they were the wrong ones, born of desperation, not strategy. The disciplined hum of the talk had devolved into a cacophony of anxious, conflicting reports. Through it all, Eva Rostova had remained at her console, her eyes closed, listening to the ghost of the final, fragmented transmission. She had been cross-referencing the jamming signature with a global threat database, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. Now, she stood up. She walked calmly to the central command platform, her movements deliberate, cutting through the chaos like a ship through a storm. She stood beside Thorne, though she didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the main screen. "Colonel," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight that silenced the room. "Stop!" Thorne whirled on her, his face flushed with anger. "Commander, this is not the time for your observations. I have men under fire." "You have men being slaughtered," she corrected him, her tone flat, devoid of emotion but sharp as a razor. "And your panic is going to get more of them killed. The QRF will not fly into the canyon. That's what the enemy expects. They'll be shot down before they get within 5 clicks. Her absolute certainty was jarring. The analysts and officers in the room stared, frozen. They're using a layered defense, she continued, pointing to the topographical map. The ambush element in the canyon is the bait. The EW and anti-air assets are positioned on these ridges here and here. They've established a complete dome of denial over the objective area. They're not militia. They're Tier 1 mercenaries, likely ex-Spetsnaz, judging by the tactical signature of the jamming array. She turned to the senior drone pilot. Sergeant, I need the Reaper drone you have on station over Sector Gamma. Retask it immediately. Do not fly it over the canyon. I want it to approach from the south, at maximum altitude, and use its synthetic aperture radar to scan the ridgeline at grid 479er. Look for heat signatures from vehicle power units. The pilot looked at Colonel Thorne for confirmation. Thorne was speechless, staring at Rostova as if seeing her for the first time. Do it, Rostova commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. The pilot, compelled by her authority, immediately began executing the order. She then turned to Master Sergeant Vance. Sergeant, I need the QRF on standby, but I need a smaller element. 4 men, your most experienced. Have them prep for a high-altitude, low-opening jump. Their insertion point will be 10 clicks west of the objective on this plateau. She indicated a spot on the map far from the fighting. They will move in on foot, no vehicles, no radio chatter. Vance, unlike the others, didn't hesitate. He saw something in her he hadn't seen since his own days in the secret corners of the military. He simply nodded. Yes, ma'am. He used the honorific without a trace of irony. It was a statement of fact. Rostova pointed at the lead communications tech. You. Isolate the jamming frequency. I don't want you to counter it. I want you to piggyback a single, compressed data packet onto their own carrier wave. It's an old trick, but they won't be looking for it. The packet will contain a simple, repeating message. A single authentication code. She strode to a whiteboard and wrote a short alphanumeric sequence. That is Reaper Team's emergency duress code. If they see it on their surviving electronics, they'll know help is coming, and they'll know it's real. It will also tell them to expect instructions on a non-standard channel. The room was now utterly silent, save for the click of keyboards as her orders were followed without question. Colonel Thorne stood by, his face pale, his authority completely and utterly eclipsed. He was a spectator in his own command center. This woman had dissected the entire tactical situation in seconds, identified the enemy, predicted their strategy, and formulated a complex, multi-layered counter-assault, all while everyone else was panicking. Drone is in position, ma'am, the pilot announced. Scanning the ridgeline. Got it. I have 3 distinct heat blooms. Looks like 3 vehicles, concealed under camouflage netting. Power units are running hot. Those are the jammers, Rostova said, and their command and control node. Now, get me a firing solution for 2 Hellfire missiles. Target the outer 2 vehicles first, leave the central one. We cut off their support, isolate the head. When the missiles are 10 seconds from impact, I want you to switch the Reaper's laser designator to the central vehicle. The pilot's eyes widened. Ma'am, if I switch the designator, the first 2 missiles will lose their lock and miss. They won't miss, Rostova stated. The enemy's EW suite will detect the incoming missiles and the laser designation. Their standard countermeasure is to deploy smoke and flare. But they will focus that defense on the target being actively painted. They'll assume it's a single attack on their C2 node. By the time they realize there are multiple inbound threats, it will be too late. The first 2 missiles, flying on their last known trajectory, will hit the unsmoked targets. It was an incredibly sophisticated, high-risk maneuver, a piece of tactical artistry that balanced on a razor's edge of psychology and technology. No manual, no textbook contained a plan like that. It was born of pure, hard-won experience. "Fire on my mark," Rostova said, her eyes fixed on the screen. The entire talk held its breath. They were watching a master at work. Master Sergeant Vance watched her, a memory stirring in the back of his mind. He'd seen this once before, years ago, in a classified after-action report from a disastrous operation in the Bekaa Valley. A rescue mission, led by a shadowy figure whose team had gone in against impossible odds and pulled out a captured CIA officer. The tactical plan in the report was unorthodox, brilliant, and bore the same signature of audacious precision. The mission commander was listed only by a call sign, a name that was spoken only in hushed, reverent tones in the darkest corners of the Special Operations community. Vance moved quietly to his own terminal. His security clearance was higher than most on the base. He typed in Rostova's name, but the standard personnel file was heavily redacted, showing only her rank and a generic administrative assignment. It was a cover. He dug deeper, using an old access code he probably wasn't supposed to have anymore. He initiated a search on the Highside network, the one that held the real secrets. He typed in the search parameters: Naval Special Warfare. Commander: Rostova, E. He added a keyword from the old report, Bekaa. The system churned for a moment, then a single, heavily encrypted file appeared on his screen. Access was restricted. He used a final override key. The file opened. It contained one name, Commander Eva Rostova, and below it a single line: Commanding Officer, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Task Force Aegis. Call sign, NWEX. Vance felt a chill run down his spine. DevGru, SEAL Team 6. But Task Force Aegis was another level entirely. A unit so secret its existence was officially denied. They were the ghosts, the quiet professionals sent to solve problems no one else could. And Nix was a legend. A phantom commander credited with some of the most daring and successful special operations of the last decade. They said Nix could see the entire battlefield, 3, 4, 5 moves ahead. They said Nix had never lost an operator. He looked up from his screen at the unassuming woman who was now calmly directing a symphony of violence half a world away. He stood up, walked over to the stunned Colonel Thorne, and leaned in, whispering into his ear. "Sir, that's not a liaison. That's Commander Eva Rostova. Her call sign is Nix. She's the CO of Task Force Aegis." Colonel Thorne's face went from pale to ashen. The blood drained from it, leaving only the waxen visage of a man who has just realized he tried to teach a shark how to swim. The name Nix rippled through the senior NCOs and officers in the room who understood its significance. The smirks, the condescension, the dismissive attitudes, they all evaporated, replaced by a profound, shell-shocked silence. The air in the talk crackled with the sheer gravity of her identity. They weren't just watching a competent officer. They were in the presence of royalty. "Mark," Rostova said, her voice cutting through their shock. On the screen, 2 streaks of light detached from the drone. 10 seconds later, the laser designator on the drone's feed flickered, shifting its focus to the central vehicle. As Rostova had predicted, the target instantly deployed a thick cloud of white smoke. 2 seconds after that, 2 massive, silent explosions blossomed on the ridge, precisely where the other 2 vehicles had been. The jamming signal across the valley died instantly. "Comms are restored," the tech shouted. "I have Reaper team. It's faint, but it's there." On the ground, the sudden cessation of the overwhelming enemy fire was more jarring than the noise itself. The constant, oppressive blanket of machine gun rounds vanished. One moment, Jensen was sure they were about to be overrun. The next, there was an eerie silence, broken only by the crackle of the burning drone and Doc's pained groans. Then, a tinny digitized voice squawked in his earpiece. It was the authentication code Rostova had sent, repeating on a loop. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through him. "Nightingale Actual, this is Reaper 1, he gasped into his mic. "We are pinned down, 1 WIA, ammo critical. We are—" "Reaper 1, this is Nightingale," Rostova's calm voice cut in, clear as a bell. "Be advised, a QRF is inbound on foot from the west. The enemy's Overwatch and C2 elements have been neutralized. The ambush team in the canyon is now deaf and blind. They will be disorganized. I want you to start a fighting withdrawal to the east, back the way you came. Use suppressive fire on the upper ridges. Make them think you're trying to climb out. They will move to intercept." "Withdraw east?" Jensen questioned, confused. "That's a dead end." "Correct," Rostova replied. "You are the bait. Draw them into the narrowest part of the canyon, grid 84 Alpha. The QRF will be establishing a superior firing position above them. They will be caught between you. On my signal, you will turn and fight. We are going to crush them between the hammer and the anvil." There was no hesitation in Jensen's voice this time. The authority, the cold, perfect logic of the plan was undeniable. This wasn't some staff officer. This was a commander. "Solid copy, Nightingale. Reaper team is moving." For the next hour, Rostova conducted the battle from the TOS as if she were a maestro leading an orchestra. She coordinated the QRF's silent movement, watched the enemy mercenaries through the Reaper drone's thermal optics as they fell for the feint, and guided Jensen's team through their fighting retreat. She spoke in short, clipped phrases, her voice a constant, reassuring presence in the ears of the men on the ground. She was their eye in the sky, their guardian angel, their vengeful god. When the moment was right, as the mercenaries crowded into the narrow choke point of the canyon, she gave the order. "All elements, execute." The QRF opened up from the ridge above, their fire plunging down into the trapped enemy. At the same time, Jensen and his team, as instructed, turned and unleashed the last of their ammunition. Caught in a brutal, inescapable crossfire, the mercenary force was systematically annihilated in less than 90 seconds. The silence that followed was absolute. The medevac helicopter landed back at FOB Nightingale just before dawn. The ramp lowered, and the battered survivors of Reaper Team emerged. Diablo and Spectre were walking wounded, covered in dust and dried blood, supporting their seriously injured corpsman, Doc, on a stretcher. Lieutenant Commander Jensen was the last one off. His face was grim, his uniform torn, his confident swagger completely gone. He looked 10 years older. As the medics rushed forward to take Doc, Jensen's eyes scanned the small crowd that had gathered near the flight line. He saw Colonel Thorne, looking humbled and small. He saw the analysts from the TOS, their faces filled with awe. And he saw her. Commander Rostova stood apart from the others, her hands in her pockets, her expression giving nothing away. She was just a woman in cargo pants and a khaki shirt, watching the sun rise. Jensen walked directly toward her, his exhausted team following his lead. He stopped a few feet in front of her. The silence was heavy with unspoken words, gratitude, shame, and a profound, newly forged respect. He was a SEAL, an operator from the most lauded Special Forces community in the world, and he had been comprehensively outmaneuvered, outthought, and then saved by the quiet woman his arrogance had so easily dismissed. He didn't offer excuses or thanks. The moment was too raw, too fundamental for that. He simply brought himself to attention, his battered body as straight as he could make it, and gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of total concession, an acknowledgement from one warrior to another, to his superior. His team followed suit, their gazes locked on her with a reverence they usually reserved for legends. Colonel Thorne approached, his face etched with mortification. "Commander Rostova, Nix, there are no words. I apologize for my conduct. I underestimated you. I endangered my men. What you did tonight—" Rostova finally turned her head, her gaze meeting his. There was no triumph in her eyes, no "I told you so." There was only a deep, abiding weariness, the weight of command. "Your men are alive, Colonel," she said, her voice soft. "That's all that matters. See to your wounded." She turned and walked away, leaving the colonel, the SEALs, and the entire command staff standing in the long shadows of the new day. Her victory needed no comment. Her competence required no validation. It simply was. Hours later, long after the adrenaline had faded and the base had settled back into its monotonous rhythm, the armory was a pocket of quiet solitude. The air was thick with the familiar, acrid smell of gun solvent and carbon fouling. Racks of rifles stood in silent rows like sleeping soldiers. Eva Rostova was there, alone, at a cleaning bench. She had field-stripped a standard-issue M4 carbine, the same weapon carried by the young airmen at the gate, and was methodically cleaning each component with a small brush and a solvent-soaked rag. The bolt carrier group, the firing pin, the star chamber. Each piece was cleaned with a focused, practiced efficiency that was almost meditative. It was a ritual, a way of centering herself after the storm. The door creaked open. Airman Patel, the guard from the gate, stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was on duty, making his rounds. He saw her and froze, his eyes wide. News of what had happened in the talk, of who she really was, had spread through the base like wildfire. The quiet, unassuming woman he had dismissed and made wait in the sun was Nix, a living legend. He felt a hot wave of shame wash over him. He stepped inside, his boots scuffing nervously on the concrete floor. "Ma'am, Commander," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. About this morning, at the gate. I was unprofessional. I'm sorry, I had no idea." Rostova didn't look up from her work. She took a clean patch and ran it through the barrel of the rifle, her movements smooth and economical. The patch came out gray. She discarded it and prepared another. "You were following your manifest, Airman," she said without inflection. "Protocol is protocol." "But I was disrespectful," Patel insisted, needing to unburden himself. "I made you wait. I treated you like you were nobody." She finally paused, setting down the cleaning rod. She looked up, and her eyes, clear and steady, met his. There was no anger in them, no judgment, only a profound exhaustion that seemed to come from a place far beyond the events of a single night. "Everyone is nobody, Patel," she said, her voice low and even, "until they're not. Your only job is to know the difference when it matters." She picked up the bolt, wiping it down with an oiled cloth until the steel gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Keep your post sharp," she told him, her focus returning to the task at hand. "Pay attention to the details. That's all that matters. Now get back to your rounds." "Yes, ma'am," he said, the words catching in his throat. He backed out of the armory, closing the door softly behind him. Eva Rostova was alone again, with the smell of steel and oil. She reassembled the rifle with the fluid, unconscious competence of a master craftsman, the click of the bolt seating, the snap of the takedown pins, the solid chunk of the charging handle. They were familiar, comforting sounds, the tools of her trade. She finished, racked the action one last time, and set the clean rifle back on the bench. Through a small, grime-streaked window, she could see the first brilliant rays of the sun cresting the distant mountains. painting the savage landscape in hues of gold and rose. Another night was over. Another dawn had been bought and paid for. She stood for a long moment, watching the light reclaim the world, her shadow long and solitary on the armory floor. Then she turned, picked up her duffel bag, and walked out to face the day.